All right, guys, welcome back to another video. My name is Christian, and we're going to be talking about compression today. And I kind of was struggling on what kind of video topic I wanted to do today, and I think compression is a great one because compression is something that I struggled with for a few years because I didn't want to be that person that didn't know in class what a compressor did, or if I was told what it did and I didn't exactly know how to use it, I didn't want to be that guy that had to stop the class and get, retaught how to use it. And so I had to, over the kind of years, had to kind of teach myself, and I kind of wanted to break it down so that it's a little bit easier for you guys. So this video is going to be talking about compression. I did build a keynote because I want this to be a two-part kind of lesson, where part one is going to be understanding the basics of compression, what it does, what it looks like, and then in part two I want to dive into Pro Tools and actually use the compressor. And in part two, when we start actually using the compressor, if you watched part one, you'll be more familiar with what these actual terms and parameters are, versus trying to fit everything into one video. I feel like it could be too much information if we try to do everything in one video. So we're going to go ahead and talk about compression and the basics of compression. Keep in mind that, when it comes to recording and audio, everything is kind of to taste, and you should always use your ears, like I said in past videos, mix with your ears. However, there are some key things to kind of, take into consideration, and we're going to go over some of those things. All right, so this is your basic Pro Tools stock compressor plugin that they give you. And the way that I like to look at it is in several different sections, three main sections, quite honestly. If you noticed, you have your levels, you have kind of your parameters, where it says compression/limit, and then you can kind of see the graph right above that. And so we're going to go over all these things. So our basic overview is going to be going over the levels, threshold, ratio, attack, release, knee, and makeup gain. So what a compressor is, what it basically does is it's a piece of gear. If you're using an outboard piece of gear, like a physical piece of gear compressor, or it could be a plugin like I just showed you, that makes the loud parts of your track a bit quieter and the quiet parts louder for a more balanced mix. And a kind of an easy way to think about a compressor is kind of an automated fader writer to a certain degree, right? So instead of writing the fader to make the vocals louder and quieter in certain parts to make it sit in the mix, you can use a compressor to help kind of do that for you. And I say to a degree because if you, on a compressor, you can squash the sound the higher the ratio, and you can kind of, distort it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can't really get that same effect by just riding the faders. So when we talk about the levels, when you take a look at the compressor plugin, you can see that we have an in and an out and a GR. And GR is basically just gain reduction. So let's define some of these terms. You have your input, which is the signal coming in from your track. You can see that on the far left. Your output is the signal post-compression. And then GR is the gain reduction during compression. So those are your basic terms and basic definitions of these three meters that you're seeing here on the level side. Next, we kind of have our parameter section, and this is where it kind of can get a little confusing. At least for me, this is where it kind of got confusing. So we have knee, attack, gain, ratio, release, and threshold, and we're actually going to come and we're going to talk about these terms right now. So threshold essentially tells the compressor when to actually turn on in terms of the dB. So for example, setting the threshold to -10 dB, you're essentially telling the compressor to turn on when something goes above that level, right? So anything below negative 10 dB, the compressor will not turn on. Any sound higher than 10 dB will trigger the compressor, negative 10 dB, excuse me, will trigger the compressor to then turn on and activate. And negative dB is just for the sake of example. It could be anything that you want to set it to. But that is basically how your threshold works. Ratio is how much gain reduction the compressor applies when the signal passes that threshold. So we have our threshold. Let's keep going with, I guess, negative 10 dB is our threshold. Setting a ratio of 2 to 1, for example, means that for every 2 dB of input signal, only 1 dB of signal will be outputted. So if we have 10 dB of input signal, then 5 dB is the output on a 2 to 1 ratio. So, basic math there. And this mathematical concept is applied to the other ratios as well. And when you think about it, when you have a higher ratio, which you can go to like 20 to 1 if you really wanted to, you'll notice how it sounds more squashed and it sounds distorted, which isn't necessarily a bad thing by any means. You can actually get some cool effects by distorting your tracks using compression. A thing that comes to mind right off the top of my head is drums, right? So you can actually have a drum track. Let's say you have a room mic. You mic up individual parts of the drums, but let's say you have a room mic as well that captures the entire kit and the sound of the room. If you take that room mic of the drums and you heavily compress it to the point of distortion and you kind of blend it in with your drum mix, you can get some really cool sounds by doing that. And that's a good use of distortion using compression. You never want to, take it to the point of distortion where it just sounds really bad and really squashed. There are some cool little tricks and tips, which I encourage you to look at other engineers and their way of doing things when it comes to that kind of audio effects. So attack is how much time it takes for the compressor to apply that reduction. And there's basically two things here. You got slow and you have fast attacks. And of course your attacks are going to be different from instrument to instrument. It's going to vary, and you got to take that into consideration. Slow attacks can be beneficial on vocal tracks because you want your vocals to you want the notes from your singer to kind of ring out. You want to give time for the vocal to ring out past the threshold, which then will be compressed. It's more natural sounding that way. Fast attacks can be great for rapid transients, such as a snare hit, a kick drum, or guitar picking patterns. These are good uses of fast attack. And then you have your release, which is how quickly the compressor turns off. Now, the release is generally set to the mixer's ears. This is why I always say mix with your ears and not with your eyes, because there's just certain aspects of audio where you have to trust your ears. You have to trust what you think sounds good. And if you set the release too fast, you can get some unnatural sounds, possibly. But if you go too slow, the compressor takes too long to shut off. And then maybe, that produces some weird audio signal issues as well. This is not by any means the gold standard, but I've been told and I've seen that a good starting point for a release is 60 milliseconds. But take that with a grain of salt. Always go by your mix and go by with what sounds right for your mix. It's kind of the same as like presets. When you see that you can have a good starting point, or so-and-so says there's a good starting point of 60 milliseconds, that's no different than trying to apply a preset. And presets are by no means a bad thing. However, if you use a preset, try tweaking it to make it sound and fit to your mix. And presets aren't a bad thing to use as a jumping off point, especially if you're using compressors for the first time. You can set a preset And then you can kind of see how the programmers and engineers of these presets think that it should be, based on what you choose, whether it be vocal, snare, etc. There's nothing wrong with using presets, but don't be in the habit of using presets only. Use those presets as a jumping off point. Next we have the knee, and the knee is simply the transition from uncompressed to compressed and how fast that transition kind of occurs. And there's kind of two things to kind of take away from the knee is soft knee and hard knee. Now, when you go back and look at that plugin that I showed you, you can kind of see that by default, it kind of gives it a hard knee if you look at that angle. A soft knee is more rounded, and it's a more gradual transition from an uncompressed to compressed. The hard knee is a more abrupt and fast transition. So, like I think for vocals, I think it's great to have a softer knee because you're going to have a more fluid and natural transition with that vocal track. A hard knee could be good on more abrupt transients, again, like snares and things like that. Makeup gain is also an important thing to consider. So when you compress a track, naturally your track is going to be lower in volume because you're taking those peaks, the high parts of your song, and you're compressing them to be lower in volume so that your balance between your quiet parts and your loud parts are kind of consistent throughout your track, right? And so your track is going to be naturally lower in volume because of that gain reduction. The way to compensate for this is to utilize that gain knob on your compressor, and that gain knob is makeup gain. And so as a general rule of thumb, you should mix back in or use that gain knob to kind of match the input signal that you had at the beginning. That's what I did. You can sometimes go a little bit louder if you want. It all depends on how you want your track to sound. But generally speaking, it's a good idea at the very least to have your output and your input kind of match. That way, it gives your quiet parts that boost in volume while your louder parts are still on the same kind of consistent playing ground as the quieter parts. So makeup gain is an important thing to consider. And that is basically it. It's a pretty easy piece of gear when you break it down as simple as possible. It doesn't have to be terribly difficult, and we can actually go back here. So if you see this part on the graph, where if you look at the options and then look to the right of that, you can see how it's a diagonal line and then it angles to the lesser diagonal line. That point, that angle is the knee. And so when you increase the dB on the knee parameter, it's going to smooth out. It's going to be, that would be your soft knee. And so it's going to take some time, to play around with and things like that. But this is the basics of compression and how it generally works. And I hope defining these terms actually helped you when it comes to kind of breaking down what a compressor does and kind of what each parameter does. And I just kind of hope that this helped you. And this is part 1. In part 2, we're going to be diving into actual hands-on bringing tracks in and utilizing these parameters to try to make that sound different. And we'll do that together. But this was meant to be a more lecture-y style video because I want the audience to understand the concepts of a compressor at its most basic level before turning knobs and jumping in. And again, I didn't want the video to be 30 minutes long with defining terms and explaining what it does, plus trying to get the audio to see if there's a difference you can tell with the audio and things like that. I think that can be its own separate video. feel free to go back into this video and write these terms down. I can even email the keynote to you if you really want. Just reach out to me in the comments, and then I can give you my email or vice versa. We'll figure something out. But if you're lost and need more clarity, feel free to leave a comment. Do hit like on this video as it helps the channel out, and please do hit subscribe because we don't have a super big audience, but we're growing. We are a small community here on this channel, but we are growing consistently, and I see that every day. And I do appreciate the people who do hit that like and hit that subscribe button. And we're almost at 100 subscribers, which is crazy. I mean, I've tried YouTube in the past, and I've never gotten this close to 100 subscribers, which on paper doesn't sound like a lot, but when you really think about it, it kind of is. You have 100 people following your content, almost 100 people, right? We have 80 people following our content, and it's a very cool thing to keep in mind. I mean, that's bigger than, that's like bigger than an average college campus course class, I mean, I guess depending on where the college is. But anyway, I digress. This was part 1, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And feel free to, again, support the channel, and I'll see you guys in part 2. Okay, take care.